Okay, so now we are going to look at different command words for 20-mark essay and we're going to unpack them together. Please only watch this video after you've gone through the slides. Okay, so here are some common command words that are used in 20-mark essays. These include assess, discuss, evaluate, to what extent, and how far. So this set of command words have a similar requirement. So what they require you to do is to firstly consider different options, different arguments, and then weigh them based on a set of criteria, and finally come to a conclusion to their relative influence, importance, and success. I will use examples to show you what it means. Okay, one very common type of question would require you to evaluate the extent to which one factor or one cause or one process is important or the most important in influencing the occurrence of a phenomenon, or they will ask you the extent to which one impact or strategy is the most significant and effective. Okay, so in the question, they will give you one factor or they will give you one impact or one strategy, and they expect you to consider and weigh it against other factors, causes, processes, impacts, and strategies, and to see which one is the most important or the most effective. So some examples, right? So for example, in the A-level question 2018, to what extent is climate the main factor affecting the characteristics of drainage basin water balance? We have not learned this yet, it's okay, but you can see that here they've given you one factor of climate, and they ask you to what extent is climate the main factor. So you have one factor, given factor, which is climate, but you need to, on your own, bring in other factors, and then you weigh and see which one is the main factor. Okay, so that is what the question requires to do, and that's what we do when we evaluate. So we consider a range of factors and then we weigh them and see which one is the most important factor based on a set of criteria. Okay, I'll talk about the criteria later. So another similar question, the main cause of floods is the climate. So the given factor once again is the climate, right? And you need to compare it against other causes of flood to see which one is the main cause of floods. This can also be seen in questions on impact or strategies. So for example, soil erosion is the most severe consequence of tropical deforestation. To what extent do you agree? So here you look at the given impact, soil erosion, but you also need to compare with other impacts and weigh which impact is the most severe. So similarly here, alternative energy sources are the best solutions to mitigate the effects of climate change. To what extent do you agree? So the given strategy is alternative energy sources, but you need to weigh against other strategies to see whether it really is the best solution out of a range of strategies. Okay, so that's what questions they ask you to assess, discuss, evaluate, or they ask you to what extent, how far do you agree. That's usually what they want you to do. They want you to consider and weigh a range of factors, a range of impact and strategies, and see which one is the most significant, the most effective, the most important. Okay, so we have another type of question, very similar. So they always want you to, as I just mentioned, they want you to evaluate a range of factors, impacts, and strategies in terms of their relative influence, importance, or success. So another type of question will also want you to do the same thing, to evaluate a range, but they don't give you any given factor in the question. So you have to come up with the entire range on your own. So some examples, this A-level specimen paper, the occurrence of mass movement is influenced by different factors discussed. So here they didn't give you any factor in the question. You have to come up with the factors on your own. So similarly, this question in A-level paper 2017, evaluate the effectiveness of strategies used to manage water scarcity. So they didn't give you any strategy. You have to come up with a range of strategies on your own. So this is a bit different, for example, in this case where they give you one strategy, alternative energy sources, and then you come up with the remaining on your own, right? But in this case, they didn't give you any strategies. You have to come up with the whole range on your own. But other than that, the answering technique is still the same. The requirement of the question is still the same, which is to consider a range of factors, a range of impact, a range of strategies, and then to weigh and see which one is the most significant or the most effective. Okay, and then the last set of question for evaluate, discuss, and so on is that they give you a view or a statement and they want you to evaluate the merit or validity of the view. So, how valid this statement is, or how applicable the statement is. But of course, to evaluate the validity of the view, you need to consider and weigh different sides of an argument. So, for instance, you can consider for and against, and then you weigh and then you come up with your own stand. Okay, so to make it a bit easier, let's look at an example. So you have learned about Malthus, so we look at this question. To what extent do the views of Thomas Malthus on the relationship between population and resource apply today? So they are asking you to evaluate the validity or the applicability of the views of Malthus. So to evaluate, you need to weigh and consider both sides. So you need to consider how the views of Malthus are still applicable today, but also on the other hand, how some of his assumptions are no longer applicable today, and then you need to weigh and decide ultimately to what extent do his views still apply today. Okay, so to sum up, right, for questions they ask you to assess, discuss, evaluate, or they ask you to what extent, how far, usually you need to consider different arguments. So maybe I go back to the first slide. So you need to consider different arguments or different options, could be different factors, different impacts, different strategies, and then you weigh them and you decide on their relative influence, their relative importance, and their relative success. Okay, some of you may be wondering how do we weigh them? No worry, we'll look at that in a while and we'll also look at that in subsequent lessons. But for now, I want you to just understand when you look at these command words, what exactly you are required to do. Okay, which is to consider different options, different arguments, to weigh them based on a set of criteria, and then conclude on their relative influence, importance, and success. Okay, there's one more command word for 20 mark question. This is quite a special command word, so it's on its own and it's called examine. Examine is different from evaluate, assess, discuss, and so on because examine means that you are supposed to focus on one factor or one theory, one impact, or one strategy. Okay, so to examine is different in the sense that you're not really considered or you're not really required to evaluate a range of factors, a range of impacts, a range of strategies, but you should evaluate mainly the significance or effectiveness of the given factor. Okay, so examine is different in the sense that it doesn't want you to look at a whole range of factors, but you examine and you evaluate mainly the given factor. So, for example, 2011 H2 Geog A level, the question is with reference to one or more countries, examine the role of the state in economic development. So, in this question, the focus is on the state. So, most of the essay would be evaluating the role of the state, whether the state is effective, significant, or not in economic development. Right, so that's something very special about examine. So you must be very careful if you come across a question that asks you to examine because examine means you focus on the given factor or the given theory, the given impact, the given strategy. Okay, so for examine questions, you are not required to bring in a whole range of factors, a whole range of impacts, and a whole range of strategies. Okay, but that said, examine questions are quite rare. We have not really seen it yet, except in 2011, right? However, it can still come out, so we need to be prepared. If the question asks you to examine, just evaluate mainly the given factor.